Another potential trade target for the Bucs coming out of the state of Ohio. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. We are going to get into the Myles Garrett mock draft a little bit later on, but let's talk about another position of need for the Buccaneers and some possible targets. We're going to start that with another hypothetical trade. Now, last week, I brought up a text conversation with insider Scotty. He was concerned about linebacker, had that as his number one need for the Buccaneers in the offseason. And while I don't feel like it's the top need for the Bucs, there's no question that they do need to address inside linebacker this offseason. It's in my top three. It's just not number one. Well, now there's another potential trade target for the Buccaneers coming out of Cincinnati. We've talked a lot about edge rusher Trey Hendrickson and the boost that he would give the pass rush, but linebacker Germaine Pratt has officially requested a trade out of Cincinnati and away from the Bengals, and lining him up next to Lavonte David would be absolutely outstanding. Pratt finished with 143 tackles, 6 pass breakups, 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, and 2 interceptions last season for the Bengals. He has at least 2 interceptions in each of his last 3 seasons, at least 2 forced fumbles in 3 out of his last 4 seasons, and over 110 tackles in back-to-back years. Pratt is more of a run stopper and coverage linebacker than he is a blitzing linebacker, which is exactly what the Bucs are in desperate need of. And according to PFF, last year was his 3rd best coverage season of his career, with his top 3 coverage seasons being from 2022 to 2024. This is a dude that steps in and immediately upgrades the linebacking core next to Lavonte David and gives them a piece that they were desperately missing the last 2 years between the poor coverage of Devin White and KJ Britt over that span. Here's the other thing. He's not going to cost a lot of money. Not only a lot of money, but he's not going to cost a lot of capital. Pratt is entering the final year of his contract and is due only $5.25 million this upcoming season. He's set to turn 29 years old in May. So a day 3 pick or even a day 3 pick swap could end up getting the deal done. If you want to get a little crazy, we do like to get crazy on the show, but if you want to get a little crazy and you could do some draft picks, maybe a player in exchange for Trey Hendrickson and Germaine Pratt, you could. For now, I would say that a 5th round pick for Pratt is probably enough to get that specific deal done. But if you want to start talking about a 2 this year, a 2 next year, and maybe a 5th round pick swap for Pratt and Hendrickson, that might get the deal done as well. Now, considering that Pratt has requested a trade, there is also the chance that the Bengals just move on and cut him. That would cost them $2.3 million in dead cap. Now, it doesn't matter if it's a cut, doesn't matter if it's a trade, doesn't matter if it's before June 1st, if it's after June 1st, the Bengals are going to be on the hook for $2.3 million in dead money, no matter what. So no matter what direction they go in to move on from Pratt, if they move on from Pratt, it's going to cost them $2.3 million in dead money. So there is the chance that he just hits the open market, but I'm sure they would rather get something, anything for him rather than let him walk for free. You could see the Bucs offer a fifth-round pick, which before comp picks are calculated and added in, that would be pick number 158 in exchange for Pratt, and the Bengals sixth, which would be pick 195. So the Bucs would essentially drop 37 spots in the draft. They would lose their fifth rounder, pick up a sixth rounder, and a starting linebacker. It is worth noting that, like the Bucs, the Bengals only have 6 picks this year. Now, Cincinnati has 1 in each round from rounds 1 through 6. They don't have a 7th. The Bucs have a pick in each round except the 6th. So essentially, a trade like this would shift the Bucs pick from the 5th to the 6th round while giving the Bengals 2 fifths and then nothing after that. The issue, as always, will be how many teams are going to be interested in Pratt's service and what that is going to do to the asking price for Pratt in a trade. The more teams that are involved, the higher the price gets. The Bucs may end up having to bow out. I'm not sure if there's going to be 4 or 5 teams lining up for Pratt. There probably should be. He's a really good starting linebacker, but it's all about supply and demand. If there's a lot of demand for his services and there's only one Pratt, that price is going to go up. Apparently, the reason that Pratt is upset and wants out is because of how close he was with former defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo. He was fired after the season when the Bengals had a catastrophically bad year on the defensive side, and they hired former Notre Dame defensive coordinator Al Golden to take his place. That also means, and I tell you that for a reason, it also means that the frustration that Pratt is feeling could fizzle out. He may sit down with Al Golden. He may get a call from Golden saying, look, this is how I want to use you in this defense. This is what I think this scheme can do for you, what you're going to be able to accomplish as a player if you stick around here. And then Pratt could decide that he wants to stay, making this entire thing moot. But as of right now, Pratt wants out of Cincinnati. He wants to move on. It's a player that does not cost a lot in terms of draft capital to acquire him, does not cost a lot against the cap in order for him to play for you this year. And then, if the Bucs make a move for Pratt, it could wind up being longer term and less expensive for the Bucs than getting into bidding wars for starting linebackers when free agency begins. There are some really good options that we're going to talk about in just a minute, but giving up a day 3 pick for a guy that's less than $6 million this season and then signing him to an extension before the season starts to keep that price down a little bit might be the best move for the Bucs. Pratt is a proven commodity. He is one of the brighter spots on that Cincinnati defense. And if the Bucs are smart, they're going to at least look into the possibility of bringing him in. Again, there's the outside chance that the Bucs call about Pratt. Maybe they start talking about Hendrickson as well. Come away with both guys. Come away with Hendrickson instead of Pratt. It is really, really rare in the NFL to get 2 players from one team in a single trade, but it's certainly not out of the question. One way or another, I'm starting to think there's a real good shot that the Bucs end up with one of these Cincinnati Bengals defensive players on their roster next year. But the question is, who is it going to be? What are the Bucs going to be willing to pay to get either Pratt or Hendrickson? But Germaine Pratt on the inside of that defense, lining up next to Levante David, could be a really, really solid upgrade for this Todd Bowles scheme, and being able to get a proven linebacker that's solid in coverage is going to upgrade the defense immensely. But who are some other linebacking options for the Buccaneers if they want to lock in a starter prior to the draft? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking up a player to hit a clutch 3, I never feel like I've missed out on a chance. Plus, The app is super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. The Boston Celtics are the favorites to win the NBA Finals at plus 195, followed by the Oklahoma City Thunder at plus 230, and then the Cleveland Cavaliers at plus 850. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. The new Locked On NFL is here, and it's 2 shows every day. You got the Madman Tyler Rowland kicking off your morning. Then you can stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. You add in the Locked On local experts, you're going to get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. So make it your second listen at the new Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Greg Allman of Fox Sports, the godfather of the Locked On Bucs podcast, pointed out on Twitter that Germaine Pratt may be joining a very deep free agent class of linebackers this year if the Bengals were to move on from him without a trade and just cut him instead. Allman said, quote, "Inside linebacker is one of the deepest positions in free agency, a ton of 100 tackle season proven veterans available at reasonable costs next month." So who would be some affordable options for the Bucs in free agency that could come in and upgrade that inside linebacker group next season? I'm going to start with Dre Greenlaw because he's probably my favorite of the bunch. Greenlaw suffered an Achilles injury in Super Bowl 58. He played in just 2 games last year. Prior to that, he had at least 120 tackles in back-to-back seasons to go along with 3 career interceptions, 2 career forced fumbles, 3.5 career sacks, and 18 tackles for loss. Greenlaw is that disciplined guy that roams the middle of the field to stop the run and can drop in coverage. Again, that's going to be a theme of these guys that I'm looking for in free agency. He's only 27 years old. He's going to be 28 in May. So this is a player that could be around for the next 4 or 5 years easily. And because he's coming off of a season where he missed a ton of time recovering from that Achilles injury, the market value isn't sky high. You could even give him a lot of incentives in place of guaranteed money up front in order to mitigate some of the risk of signing him off of that injury. I mentioned it last week. His estimated market value is only $6.5 million a year. 3 years, $19 million plus incentives. You backload the guarantees so that you're only paying pennies against the cap this year. That's a solid deal for the Bucs, and it's a great opportunity for Greenlaw to really shine in that role next to Lavonte David this year. Perhaps take over for him as the captain of the middle of the defense there in 2026 and beyond if Lavonte ends up retiring. Another player that I would love to see the Bucs take a chance on is Bobby Wagner. Now, full disclosure, you're going to have a really, really tough time getting him away from Washington. He loves playing for Dan Quinn, loves what the Commanders were able to do this past year, but until it's done, it's not done. And Bobby Wagner could be hitting free agency. I think that Wagner and David side by side would be one of the most dominating linebacking duos that we have seen in the NFL over the last decade. Yes, both players are aging. They're going to both be 35 years old this season, but both are still playing at an extremely high level. This is not a long-term solution. This is not a 3 or 4 year duo that you're going to have in the middle of the field. But for 1, maybe 2 years, to really improve this defense and give the Bucs a legitimate shot at competing for a championship, I take that risk. With those 2 guys, their collective football IQ and the kind of leadership that they bring to the Bucs defense that the rest of the players can feed off of, you could see an insane jump in production this year. Wagner still had 132 tackles this past season. He had 4 pass breakups, a forced fumble, 2 fumble recoveries, and 2 sacks to go along with 10 tackles for loss. He can still very obviously get the job done. Over 130 tackles for Wagner in 9 straight seasons. He is a 10-time Pro Bowler. He is a 6-time All-Pro. He and Levante together should get every Buccaneers fan super hyped just thinking about the small possibility that it could come to fruition. I would lose it if Wagner ended up signing with the Bucs, and I would make sure to have David Harrison on the show to react to that signing, because for those that don't watch Locked On Commanders, David has really been pumping the Chris Godwin to Washington you know story and hype over there. I'm sorry, David. I love you, but you're not getting Chris Godwin, and the Bucs are going to get Bobby Wagner, and you're just going to have to deal with that. But because of Wagner's age, he isn't going to cost a lot of money either. Spotrac has his estimated market value at just over $7 million per year. That's just a little bit above Greenlaw and Levante. I do not think that the Bucs would pay Levante less than they would pay Bobby Wagner, but they would probably pay both of them the exact same amount. Either way, that's two top-tier Hall of Fame caliber linebackers that you would have for at least 1 year together for under $15 million combined. I'm not sure Wagner gets to the open negotiating window before Washington locks him up, but if he does, that needs to be one of the players at the very top of the list that Jason Light is calling as soon as that window opens up. And then finally, Tyrel Dodson. So that's a name that a lot of you may not be familiar with, but he's coming off a year where he finished with 107 tackles between two different teams. He started the year with the Seattle Seahawks before being waived and claimed by the Miami Dolphins. Before that, he was with the Buffalo Bills for the first 4 years of his career. He played in 9 games with Seattle, 8 games with Miami, and that resulted in 107 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 3 interceptions, 6 pass breakups, and a forced fumble over the course of the entire season. Dotson is only 26 years old, and his estimated market value is merely $5 million a year. That's dirt cheap for a guy that not only had that level of production, but had it with 2 different teams in only 12 starts. I looked for quite a while, and I still have not been able to make sense of why Seattle waived Dotson 9 games into the season when he had the most defensive snaps on the team, as well as was the team's leading tackler. Then he continued to play at a high level in Miami for the second half of the season. In fact, all 3 of his interceptions came once he joined the Dolphins, as well as 4 of his 6 pass breakups. So he was a solid tackler. He was solid in coverage. I'm just not really sure what Seattle was looking for or expecting out of him to turn around and cut him the way that they did. I might try to reach out to Corbin of Locked On Seahawks and see what he says about it. But I wasn't able to find anything where, he was disruptive in the locker room or he had off the field issues or anything like that. He seemed like a solid player, and Seattle was just looking to shake things up, is basically the gist that I got. So, the draft is of course an option for the Buccaneers at linebacker, and the class is really deep to the point that they can find a starter in the 4th round at inside linebacker, linebacker, corner, receiver, defensive line. That's where you're going to get starters in day 2, in the early part of day 3 in this draft. But if the Bucs are going to give themselves as much flexibility as possible in the draft, you want to address the starters in free agency and through trades before the NFL draft kicks off, so that you aren't pigeonholed into drafting any specific position. Once the draft starts, you can just take best player available at any position. You can build up the depth. You can build up the future pipeline of the roster. That's why you want to see the Bucs get an edge rusher, get a corner, get a linebacker, probably get a safety, maybe even get a running back in free agency. The Bucs only had 3 last year. I don't think they bring back Chase Edmonds. So those are positions that you want to see them address. But let's talk about what a Buccaneers draft would look like if they were to trade for Myles Garrett. That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Football season may be over, but basketball is in full swing, and there's no better way to stay in the game than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. The best part, Prize Picks is quick and easy. You can set your lineup in less than 60 seconds And their fast and secure withdrawals means that I get my winnings in as little as 15 minutes. And I love their weekly promos like Taco Tuesday, where you get discounted player projections for even better value. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, all lowercase, all one word, and you're going to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. You don't need to win to get the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Wrapping things up here on a mock draft Wednesday episode of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And we are going to do this mock draft with the stipulation that the Bucs have traded for Cleveland Browns edge rusher Myles Garrett. So we can see what it cost them and how the draft shakes out from there. So I used Pro Football Focus's mock draft simulator, where it allows you to trade for players. The computer can reject your trade, all those things. So in this scenario, the trade that I was able to pull off in order to acquire Myles Garrett was that the Bucs traded pick 19 this year and a 2026 second round pick for Myles Garrett and pick 165 this year. So the Bucs lose a first rounder, they pick up a fifth rounder in exchange while also getting Myles Garrett. So boom, defensive player of the year, multi-time Pro Bowler, 17 sacks in back-to-back seasons, all the hype around Myles Garrett. He is now with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in this mock draft. So the Bucs' first pick in this draft is now number 51. Once it got to 51, there were players like UCLA linebacker Carson Schweizinger, Oregon defensive lineman Derek Harmon, Ole Miss linebacker Chris Paul Jr., who has been pretty popular among Bucs mock drafts. Unfortunately, Georgia linebacker Jalen Walker went one pick ahead of me to the Seattle Seahawks. Otherwise, that would have been a slam dunk pick for me. But I think here I want to take advantage of some of the defensive talent that fell to me. And I'm going to go with UCLA Bruins linebacker Carson Schweizinger, top 10 in coverage stops for a linebacker last season in college football. 2 interceptions, over 100 tackles. It's a big dude, 6'2", 225. I really like him. I think this is a great spot for the Bucs to draft a linebacker that can drop in coverage, make some plays that way. Really good at see the ball, get the ball, see the ball, hit the ball, side to side speed. Really, really solid linebacker there for the Bucs to put next to Levante David. At pick 83 in the third round, there's some offensive weapons that fall to me, but the name that pops out immediately, and my pick here, is Florida State cornerback Azariah Thomas. This is a Todd Bowles corner, 6'2", huge wingspan. He got better in each of his 3 years in college. He was targeted just 33 times last year, allowed only 17 receptions for 141 yards. The passer rating for opposing quarterbacks when targeting Thomas was 50.2. That is phenomenal. Thomas has major upside, and you can get a bona fide starting corner in the third round. Love that pick for the Buccaneers and what they need. In the fourth round, we're at pick number 119. I'm going to double down on linebacker because Jack Kaiser, the captain and longtime starter for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, fell into my lap. And you may not find a better coverage linebacker in this draft than Jack Kaiser. The Bucs need a lot of help in that area, and Kaiser is coming off of a season where he had over 100 tackles, but even though he's a linebacker, he also lined up last season for Notre Dame at outside corner, at slot corner, and at safety. He's a little undersized for an NFL linebacker, but he is so versatile and so good at tracking the football and just making plays that he is tailor-made for a Todd Bowles defense. He is a weapon that Bowles can use at any spot. He'll line up on the defensive line if you wanted to. We've seen him do that with Antoine Winfield Jr. Kaiser is a hybrid player that Bowles can utilize in a lot of different ways. You can have him line up in the box, and then he drops back in coverage. You can have him line up at slot corner, and he's going to blitz the quarterback. He is a a Swiss Army knife of the defensive side of the ball. I loved that pick. PFF knocked me for it a little bit. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I love the addition of Kizer at linebacker for the Buccaneers in a Todd Bowles scheme. At pick 156 in the 5th round, I'm taking a shot on Western Kentucky safety Upton Stout. He's a little on the smaller side, 5'9", 180, but this dude can ball. He is one of the highest graded safeties in the 2025 draft class, according to PFF, finished with over 50 tackles and an interception. He lines up all over the field. Really, really versatile, a Todd Bowles type of player in the secondary. He's not going to get a ton of snaps right out of the gate, but he can certainly develop into a nice weapon for the defense. He gives you depth at safety. He gives you depth at slot corner. He gives you depth at outside corner. Another one of these super versatile guys that Todd Bowles can use in a lot of different ways. The 5th rounder that we got from Cleveland in the Garrett trade, pick 165 from Cleveland via Detroit, I'm going to take Minnesota edge rusher Ja Joyner, 6'5", 265. Only 3 sacks last year, but he had 9 in 2023. His best games with Minnesota over the last 2 years came against mobile quarterbacks. He's a really, really disciplined guy with high upside. He is fantastic at keeping contained on the edges. Full disclosure, when my dad and I went to Champaign to watch Illinois take on Minnesota, this guy was an absolute wrecker. Luke Altmaier, the quarterback for Illinois, he's a mobile quarterback. They run a read option offense, and Joyner was all over Altmaier all game long, was stifling in the run game. Really like his upside this late in the draft. And then finally, in the 7th round at pick 237, speaking of going to Champaign, and you can call it a homer pick all you want, but I'm taking Illinois Fighting Illini receiver Zachary Franklin, and here's why. The Bucs may or may not bring back Sterling Shepard, but it doesn't matter if they do or not. Franklin adds a lot of speed to the receiving core, but not just that, he can be a kick and a punt returner and really inject some energy into that area of the game. Trey Palmer, when it comes to punt returns, all right, he's okay. Sean Tucker, he's all right on the kick returns, but the Bucs put 2 returners back there. Why not put some guy who is really quick, really shifty back there with Sean Tucker that can make some plays on special teams? 55 receptions for 660 yards and 4 touchdowns for the Illini last year. He can play in the slot. He can play outside. He's 6'1", 190, but he's so quick. Once you get the ball in his hands, he can make magic happen. I watched it time and time again. And let's be honest, it's the 7th round. So if all he does is return kicks and punts for you in his rookie season, you got your money's worth out of that alone. So a quick recap, this mock draft finishes with the Bucs getting Myles Garrett, and then linebacker Carson Schwesinger, cornerback Azariah Thomas out of Florida State, linebacker Jack Kizer out of Notre Dame, safety Upton Stout from Western Kentucky, edge rusher Ja Joyner out of Minnesota, and wide receiver Zachary Franklin out of Illinois. PFF gave me a B+ overall, and they knocked me on the Kizer pick because LSU edge rusher Savion Jones was sitting there, and he was a higher graded player at a position of need that I hadn't already addressed because it didn't take into consideration that I traded for Myles Garrett. But you still got an edge rusher in the 5th round with Joyner out of Minnesota, plus your 1st round pick was Myles Garrett. I am more than happy with this draft. The Bucs get 2 solid linebackers, one of them being a hybrid guy. You help the secondary out with a safety and a corner. You get a special teamer and another potential weapon for Baker Mayfield at the very tail end of this draft. I think it was solid. I don't know if the Browns would actually go for a 1st and 2nd in exchange for Myles Garrett and a 5th, but that was what PFF allowed me to do in that trade scenario. I'll take it. So I had somebody reach out in the DMs. We are going to do a Trey Hendrickson trade mock draft to see what that would look like for the Buccaneers. We'll see what PFF lets me do in trading for him and what it would cost there. But that's going to do it for this episode. Please check out everything going on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. And of course, make sure that you are following along on YouTube with those notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.